Why we say that it's colonial? Because it's not about indigenous peoples, it's not about respect to the nature of people, to the identity of people, but it's about utilization of Crimea as a military base. And of course, I mean, it was pretty common, probably you will agree with me, like back in 18th century, 19th century, whatever, we had like all the kind of wars and colonialism in the past. But the problem is that it's been exercised now.
Pemirsa Gatra TV, kembali lagi kita di special interview wawancara istimewa yang hari kali ini kita hadir tamu yang cukup menarik untuk kita bahas, isunya juga menarik untuk kita bahas, dan tamunya luar biasa karena tamunya ini datang dari luar negeri. Karena itu saya langsung saja kenalkan tamu kita hari ini, yang dimana beliau akan membahas suatu isu yang kini sedang hangat secara internasional, yaitu isu Ukraina dan Rusia, di mana di situ ada sebuah negara peninsula atau disebut dengan Crimea Peninsula menjadi suatu topik yang menjadi inti hubungan antara Ukraina dan Rusia saat ini. Dan tamu kita adalah, silakan, may you introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me.
Sure.
Terima kasih. My name is Maria Tomak. I'm coming from Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'm here with a delegation from Ukraine, which is mixed governmental NGO delegation.
Okay.
And currently I represent one of the state institutions, which is called Mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. It's a long title, sorry for that. But also it's often referred to as the Office of the Crimea Platform. And I think that further we can discuss more what Crimea platform is basically. But my background is actually in journalism, so I'm your former colleague. But then later I worked a lot for almost 10 years in human rights sphere. I dealt with human rights situation in Ukraine since 2013 till essentially 2022.
Okay, thank you Maria. Pemirsa Gatra TV, harap maaf, Antara saya sama Maria akan bicara dengan bahasa Inggris ya, karena saya nggak bisa bahasa Ukraine. Maria, thank you for the explanation by introducing yourself. Okay, so we'll be talking about is Ukraine and its relationship with Russia, and primarily the issue right here is about Crimea as well. I think most of Indonesian would understand the situation very limited. In a general context, which is currently there is a war between Ukraine and Russia, and the beginning would be not probably the main reason, but one of the reason is this Crimea Peninsula, which is has been historically base of conflict between both of the nation or even other nation in the region. Would you give us a bit background on relationship between Ukraine and Russia, and also the Crimea itself within the region?
Thank you. That's a lot to explain,
but
sure. I will try to be brief.
Just give us a slight background.
Okay, like short course on Crimean history. But first of all, I would like to admit that now we try to make our dialogue with Indonesia in particular, but also other countries of the Southeast Asia and other continents more intense. We try to explain ourselves, explain Ukraine, what Ukraine is actually fighting for. Because I realized that being like thousands of kilometers away from each other, it might be complicated, challenging to understand. But nevertheless, Indonesia felt the consequences of this war in terms of the food security, because Indonesia relied a lot previously on the export of grains from Ukraine, and that's something that affected people here and made this war more closer, maybe, but in a bad way, unfortunately. So, when it comes to Crimea precisely, I think that two contexts here are important. First one is the fact that this war that for many people around the globe seems like started in 2021, actually started in 2014. And the first point where this war started was Crimea, basically, when Russia occupied the Crimean Peninsula. And when I say occupied, it's not like just my opinion. It's something that has been confirmed multiple times by United Nations General Assembly in the resolution. So it's kind of internationally recognized fact, I would say. I would put it like this. And why it's important? Because Crimea, when it was occupied, it was literally turned into a military base by Russia. So they brought their troops, they brought their weapons, they brought their military vehicles, etc., etc. And now, in 2022, this full-scale invasion, as we call it, was launched also from Crimea. So that was an important point for Russia to start this, as we say, big war that is now ongoing. And second thing, which I believe is might be interesting for the people in Indonesia, is that Crimea is the place where a huge Muslim community lives. These are Sunni Muslim indigenous people of Ukraine, Crimean Tatars. This is Turkic people. And what is important, and not many people can realize that, is that Islam in Crimea and in territory of Ukraine exists since 10th century. For centuries. So it's not something that was brought by migrants, but that's indigenous religion also for Ukraine. So, and I believe that this is something that is important to know. And when it comes to the, so to say, background of the current war, Russia refers to Crimea a lot, claiming that Crimea is has always been Russian, as they say. But if you look into the Crimean history, and I just recall the fact that Islam in Crimea appeared in the 10th century, and that was related to indigenous peoples that formed their own state, Crimean Tatar Khanate there. And at some point in 18th century, Russian Empire, like Moscow, cancelled this statehood in Crimea and seized Crimea for the first time, militarized Crimea, and essentially very similar to the current situation. They used Crimea as a military base. And this whole Russian perception of Crimea, why we say that it's colonial? Because it's not about indigenous peoples, it's not about respect to the nature of people, to the identity of people, but it's about utilization of Crimea as a military base. And of course, it was pretty common, probably you will agree with me, back in 18th century, 19th century, whatever, we had all the kind of wars and colonialism in the past. But the problem is that it's been exercised now. And this whole war that started in Crimea is about trying to go back or put us back or bring us back to the colonial times, when territories are seized, when territories are colonized, because what we see in Crimea now is decolonization, it's the classical example, because many Russian citizens are brought now in Crimea, at least 500,000 people I understand that in the scales of Indonesia that seems like not much, but Crimea in total is 1.3 million people, and when you bring 500,000 people, that's a lot. So therefore,
I see what that Indonesia is probably just a one city population.
Probably yes, that's not much, but in Ukrainian scales, that's huge, and especially when it comes to Crimea. And of course, extracting the resources, exploitation of Crimea as a military base, trying to squeeze out the Muslim Crimean Tatar population. That's what we can see in Crimea now, and it's not only Ukrainian perception, it's something that is confirmed by the United Nations General Assembly resolutions, but also by international court institutions. So therefore, for us it's important to let people know that this injustice is going on in Ukraine and in Crimea precisely, and as there are this for Indonesia as the biggest Muslim country in the world, that might be something of interest and something that can make people raise the empathy and associate themselves with the situation.
All right, thank you very much for that explanation. So yes, I think the international community has labeled this an annexation. It's basically Russia annexing a region that particularly was owned by Ukraine. Now, in this, we find that most international are supportive with Ukraine, meaning that, of course, any land that is occupied by other nation is not proper. I think the Indonesian has a constitution based on that, and I believe you're here because you see that we have similar principle in terms of that view. But here, are you getting that support in the field? I mean, with the government, are you having support as such? And also, how about the people of Indonesia itself? Are you getting support from them?
I think it's like something that we see as a progress, as something, as a process, right?
Okay.
So you can. I think that there's this deeper issue of Ukraine and Indonesia have to know each other. Has to be familiar with each other from the very beginning, and Ukrainians normally know not much, if at all, something about Indonesia. So we need to educate ourselves in that, and part of our mission is to come up with some common projects with Indonesia, academia, institutions, or think tanks, or whatever, just to bring this perspective closer to Ukrainians. But also, I think that particularly in this part of the world, what we oftentimes see is that people associate Ukraine a lot with Soviet Union and with Russia. And it's not obvious for everyone that Ukraine is not Russia. And that is the step one that we have to achieve, is just to bring this understanding that Ukraine is a separate entity, that we gained our independence like more than 30 years ago, but we had the struggle on self-identity and acknowledgement of ourselves as a separate nation, as a separate political nation. So, and that is this step one, just to put on the mental map of people that Ukraine is a separate state, and that our fight that we fight now, our war, we fight not because that we love war. We fight because our freedom is our ultimate goal and value. And again, it's something that I believe important for many Indonesian people, obviously. And so that would be our very important step. And that's why, for instance, in our delegation, there were colleagues from Ukrainian Institute, which is a public diplomacy institution, that want to come up with some common projects with Indonesian art, and cultural institution, because I believe that the culture is a very good way of providing people with the understanding on what's going on. But also, it's a place where you can tell the human stories. Because again, being so far away from each other, again, it's something that is related to the nature of media. You have to come up with the news. You bring people news, which is about like geopolitics, politics, and there's not much space for the people's stories, the human stories. But that's how you get the essence of what is going on. So, and I believe that with these instruments, we can, like culture and arts, we can bring also human stories, so that people here can see what is going on actually, not just like in terms of ballistic missiles, how many ballistic missiles have been shelled, because it's not always, and just in the recent days we had several large attacks on Ukraine and energy infrastructure, and when we had the meetings here with students, audiences, or even with government officials, we started our conversation just with the fact that while we're talking, like our relatives are sitting in the shelters because there's a huge ballistic missile attack currently on Kyiv, on the capital of Ukraine, and our energy infrastructure has been targeted. So I think that that's really essential for understanding, but also, I mean, history, it's a very always complicated thing, but I believe that without this deep dive, you can hardly get an understanding of what would be perceived as a just peace. So that's one of the messages that our president brought here during the presidency of Indonesia in G20. the peace formula is all about the just peace that we want to achieve in this war.
All right. So once you get that understanding, once you get that relationship between the two nations, what kind of support you are looking for from just not Indonesia but also Asian countries, ASEAN countries? I mean, what kind of support to relieve you from the war or to win the war? Is that, if that's your objective? What kind of support are you looking for?
So I would say about several tracks. First of all, it's not only about the support to Ukraine. It's about bilateral cooperation that should be intensified. So recently, Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs presented the analytical document that analyzes our priorities for the cooperation with ASEAN countries, and it includes, in the first place, we have some economic areas that we can cooperate, like agricultural, for instance, or IT, like high technology, etc., etc. And also, Ukraine is very much interested in the demining in future. You know that the number of our territory that has the problems with mines, land mines, is huge. So we would need to overcome this, and some of the countries in the region have this experience, so we want to cooperate on that. So I would say that there is this interest in bilateral relations that should be intensified, even though we have this large war and we don't know when it's going to end, but we still want to sustain, but also to intensify in the areas where it's possible. So that would be the first point, and it's, of course, it's good not only for Ukraine but for the ASEAN and Indonesia in particular. But then we have, when it comes to the support, particular support, again, the peace formula. Now Ukraine is working upon the preparation of the peace formula summit that needs to be that has to be held in the nearest time, probably in Switzerland, as it was announced previously. So, and of course, we would be we would want and we would wish and we would request that Indonesia joins this summit. And in this way supports the Ukrainian vision of peace, which is not, I mean, if you look at the peace formula, it's the first points are not about Ukraine, it's about the international security. It says about there should be no nukes, nuclear security, it says about food security, energy security, so it's something that everyone is interested in, not only Ukraine, but then it says about territorial integrity of Ukraine, which again, it's not only about Ukraine, it's about the UN statute. So it's about the international order. Exactly. So, and it's something, again, this problem, I feel like in many countries, like here, but also in, for instance, Latin America or African countries, there are many countries who feel this problem of territorial integrity and who feel threatened for some reason. And they feel like there's a value in this preservation of the territorial integrity principle, as they found in UN principle. So, therefore, I think that our immediate and the close-term interest or request would be that Indonesia joins this effort on peace formula implementation. And to give you some practical examples, we have some Gulf countries that in practical terms now join the implementation of one of the points of the peace formula related to the prisoners of war and prisoners release. So, for instance, Qatar or Saudi Arabia, who helped Ukraine, or Turkey, for instance, who helped Ukraine to bring back, for instance, deported children. And I believe that this humanitarian approach, this humanitarian dimension, because political is always complicated, and we realize that we cannot get on board everyone overnight. That takes time. But when it comes to humanitarian thing, I think that it's very possible, because we still have many prisoners, especially on Crimea. We have more than a dozen Muslim Crimean Tatar people who are imprisoned illegally by Russia. So there's a room here to get engaged with a purely humanitarian agenda.
I believe Indonesian was quite in front, in terms of proposing a peace between Ukraine and Russia in the region. Our president was there, both in Ukraine and Russia. One of the reasons is, like what you said, humanity. Every time where there's inhumanity in certain region, Indonesia tries to be there, presence, and to help out, as stated, disputed in our constitution. Now, and you mentioned also the relationship would be beyond just the war, because later on, bilateral in terms of economy would always be a good way to start a relationship, and that would be a very good momentum right now. But again, there's the big issue, which is the war itself, and in that, what is Ukraine doing currently besides fighting the war itself? I'm sure doing diplomacy as well, but in terms of trying to end the situation, or improve the situation in the region, in terms of humanities, Ukraine is doing further to have that reality become true.
Prior to the 24th of February 2022, when the full-scale invasion started, Ukraine has considered political diplomatical way of ending the war as the priority one.
Okay.
So, and even the structure that I currently represent, the Office of the Crimea Platform, and the whole Crimea Platform initiative was established by President Zelensky with an aim to deoccupy Crimea using the diplomacy tools. So that was the whole purpose behind this. And actually Russia was invited to the Crimea Platform for the very beginning, but of course it's refused to participate in it. And after the full-scale invasion started, it put Ukraine on this edge of existing. So, and if you look, when it comes, because it pops up all the time, this issue of negotiations, like compromises, etc. So you have to look what is the negotiation position of the sides of Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine says we need to restore the international order according to the UN Charter. What Russia says is that Ukraine has to stop existing. Okay. So Ukraine should be demolished. So that's the position of Russia. And
is that what's
I mean,
Russia?
that is something that they tell pretty straight and forward.
Okay.
And that is something that they exercise by doing all this shelling all the time. When they target the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, it affects civilians in the first place. So, and recently the International Criminal Court issued, and Indonesia has been a member of the ICC as well, it issued a warrant arrest for several Russian military commanders. And one of him ordered, according to ICC, the shelling of energy infrastructure of Ukraine from the Crimean Peninsula, basically, which is under the occupation since 2014. So, and unfortunately, this position, we cannot negotiate on our own existence. Ukraine is a state, internationally recognized state. And we will not take compromises on whether we exist or not.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
and I'm sure Russia understands that. I mean, you can never alienate another nation. Ukraine has been a nation for so long.
But I mean, that's our problem. I mean, because we started this too late. This explanation of our complicated relations with Russia.
Yeah.
Because, now it's like a common theme to realize and to transfer this understanding that Russia has been colonizing Ukraine for centuries. Now we start to tell this story even to ourselves, and then to also to tell it to the world. And we ask for this recognition. And maybe you can relate the story to Indonesia back when Indonesia was overcoming the consequences of the Dutch colonization. I mean, I'm sure that it was so important for Indonesian people to be acknowledged not as Dutch, but as Indonesian. And that is something that is important now for Ukraine.
Yeah.
It may sound strange because it's not like 19th or 20th century anymore, it's 21st century. We should not have been, we should discuss like climate change, like environment problems, IT, like artificial intelligence, etc. But we still have to back to, very basic thing, like nationalism or like colonization. Come on, it's 21st century. But that's the reality that we face. And if we do not do this job now, first of all, Ukrainians, of course, we will have like the problems in the future. So therefore, now we try to tell this story. And it's interesting because the other day we had a chance to visit one of the museums here in Jakarta, and it was also, this exhibition in that museum was also about some things that are related to colonialism and overcoming these things. And I felt like for Indonesia, it's still a topic that is discussed,
of course,
and the consequences are being, even in very practical things like with repatriation of Indonesian arts from the Netherlands.
No, there's still on.
This process is still ongoing since
Yes.
1970s. Can you imagine? And now in Ukraine we're not yet even there. We're in the stage when Russia steals arts like and other stuff like cultural heritage from the occupied territories. And in the future, now we try, by the way, also to establish this dialogue and connections with Indonesian representatives of Ministry of Culture to understand what legal framework was used later after the end of the colonial era to bring those cultural heritage back to Indonesia. So, but we are not yet there. Now you are like the fourth generation post-colonial, but we in Ukraine, we survive this going back to colonial times basically, and that's what our struggle is all about. That's why there's not much room for the compromises. We will fight until we can do that. And of course our capacities of helping people on the ground are pretty limited in that terms, and luckily we have also some support of our friends internationally on various issues. But of course we need more help, and we need more unity of the wide world around this understanding of the whole purpose of this fight. And the support of Ukraine in preserving basically this international order.
Okay, I think it's very interesting that I hope that you being here and also your team, that creates that understanding. That understanding of where we are similar with in terms of national building, and also our differences as well. Because basically Indonesian will be surprised to know, why are you fighting with your neighbor? It's as simple as that. Both, it doesn't make sense to us because we never fight actually directly with our neighbors. In our Asian nation, our Asian counterparts, we would never see that happening. Or hopefully, but that's still a question in some Indonesian minds. That now back to Crimea. The latest, I think, as your visit here, the latest development is that Ukraine is having a bombing campaign into Crimea in terms of defending their territory against Russia. Now, is this something that must be done in terms of protecting the Crimea humanity rights? Of course, is this probably this must be something of an offensive that is strategically for worldwide, but in terms of diplomacy, does that put you back again, or how is that?
Okay, so first of all, let me comment on this first thing that you've said. In the previous year, in October of previous year, we hosted a conference which was called Crimea Global.
Okay.
And we brought many people, like experts and journalists from other continents to Ukraine. And we had a really fantastic and distinguished guest from Indonesia. It was Ambassador Dino, which is pretty famous here. And I loved his speech very much. And one of his points was really, very accurate, that Ukraine did not attack anyone.
That's true.
not Ukraine started this war. What we're trying to do is just fight back, just to protect our independence. So, and it's very important to understand that we did not initiate this war. We didn't want to have a war with Russia. So Russia started this war, and it continues this war. So, and our actually aim is just to stop this war. But we cannot, surrender, and we will not surrender.
Yes,
because for the obvious reason, and this reason in the first place is something that you can see in the liberated areas with killed people all over the place, tortured people tortured to death, lying all over the place like civilians. So of course we cannot afford it, and we will not tolerate it. And the second thing about indeed Ukrainian military has been targeting recently some of the targets basically in Crimea, but if you look what objects are being targeted, you can see that these are military objects.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
Yeah.
So Ukraine does not make shelling of civilian objects or civilian infrastructure or energy infrastructure, even in the occupied territories. So we do not do that. So Ukraine targets, and some of those targets has become really famous, like with that Russian warship, or a Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, or Ukraine actually managed to destroy 1/3 of the Russian military Black Sea Fleet and made Russia to withdraw its fleet from the western part of the Black Sea, which, by the way, allowed for the grain corridor to function.
Okay.
For this corridor
So
to bring food out of Ukraine. So again, it's a matter not only of Ukrainian fight, it's a matter of the food security also worldwide. Because again, as a consequence of this war, majority of Ukrainian ports remain blocked, closed, and that's one of the huge problems for Ukrainian economy basically, and for
global as well, of course,
and for the global as well, basically. So that's a huge difference.
I mean, we see Germany has been much hit by this war. Is near recession and stuff. So your point is correct.
Yes, absolutely. So, and it's very. Just today in the morning, we had also a meeting with some of the Indonesian young experts, and we were just discussing perceptions of our perception of this region and their perception of Ukraine and the war. And we just compare the scales, for instance, of Indonesia and Europe. I mean, if you just technically take this map of Indonesia and try to compare it, yes, it's like Europe. It's huge.
Yeah,
it's huge.
It is.
And of course, if you look at the European map, Ukraine is part of Europe, obviously.
Correct.
Therefore, there's no way that such a huge war in Ukraine will not impact the EU, of course. And that's why now we have so active and the growing activity of EU members and European countries to support Ukraine, because it matters of their own survival. It's a matter of their own survival. Especially Baltic states, like in northern that were formerly occupied by Soviet Russia, or Eastern Europe that has already also problems with Russia. They understand that if Ukraine fails, they would be the next.
Yeah.
And that's why we cannot, this the whole conversation about some compromises, etc., it does not lead anywhere, because the negotiation position of Russia is that they want Ukraine to be destroyed, then they want the whole international order to be destroyed. And I don't see any possibilities for compromises there. We have just to stop this aggressive war. Yes, and just going back to Crimea very briefly, for me, we don't have access to this territory since 2014. So there's an occupation, no independent observers or monitors were allowed to go there, from the UN, whatever. But what we have seen recently is that when Ukraine started to target Kerch Bridge or Russian military objects, immediately our citizens in Crimea started to react with solidarity actions.
Okay.
They raise Ukrainian flags, they make tattoos in the form of Ukrainian map in the internationally recognized border with Crimea, and they get persecuted for that. Like Russia applies the laws in order to persecute them for, and we have hundreds, like more than 700 of such cases all around Crimea. And for me, that's a clear signal that people support this, and they want finally to be liberated from the Russian occupation.
Okay. So basically, that is you're giving us a picture of the latest status in Crimea, which is basically yes, it is very important for Ukraine to retake Crimea, not just because to end the war, but also to stabilize the area and the region, especially for those who relies heavily on Ukraine for food and for energy sustainability.
Yes, exactly. And also I think it's very important also to going back to the indigenous peoples of Crimea, Crimean Tatars. Literally, they cannot live normally and exercise their identity and their rights under the Russian occupation.
Okay.
So it has always been like, I mean, again, 80 years ago, for instance, and we will mark this sad anniversary this year. 80 years ago, Stalin, Soviet ruler, deported Crimean Tatars from Crimea. It means that literally the whole nation was deported from their homeland, Crimea, to Central Asia, like thousands of kilometers away. And after 50 years, when USSR collapsed, they managed to go back. And that is the whole reason why Crimean Tatar people support Ukrainian state and also liberation of Crimea, because that's the only condition that they can live freely and exercise their social, political rights is under the Ukrainian state. Because again, I mean, there's lots of criticism, and it's absolutely fair that Ukraine did not have not done enough for the Crimean Tatars, and that's absolutely true. I would not deny this. Okay. But Ukraine did not made political persecutions. It did not make deportations. It did not make like all this pressure, all this demolishing of the identity.
Yeah.
I mean,
Crimea at that time is autonomous.
Autonomous
region,
republic.
Right?
It was autonomous republic. I mean, now we have these debates on what should be the administrative status of Crimea after the occupation, after the occupation, and many people believe, including myself, that's just my position, that it should be the autonomous region which is related to Crimean Tatar autonomy specifically, because previously it was not linked to the Crimean Tatar, so that was just autonomous region, but not linked to
mostly Russian as well there.
Yes, exactly. But again, when it comes to Russians, it's very important because the surveys that were held in 2013 prior to the occupation showed that the majority of population in Crimea was supportive of Ukrainian territorial integrity. So, and I really think that it's very important to understand this context because it's very specific for our situation. That so when it comes to like Russian population, it's not about the ethnicity. So many Russians that, like ethnic Russians who live in Crimea, they support Ukrainian territorial integrity, even though they're Russians. It's not about that. It's about people like individually being supportive of the international world order and being against the authoritarian Russian rule. So, and it's not related directly to their ethnicity, you know. So that's a very important thing to understand. And same goes with the language. Even now, I mean, you can find many people in Ukrainian army that fight Russian army, but they speak Russian. So that's the consequences of the colonialism. I mean, we still have many Russian-speaking people and Russian language in the public space, but that's not the point. That's not the purpose of this whole fight. It's just the fight not for the territory, but for the preservation of the international order and UN statute. You mentioned the people, the people here, meaning that there are a variety of people living within Crimea as well as Ukraine, because in the past there was basically one Uni-Soviet. Now, my question would be, our government in Indonesia, we understand it stands. They try to
establish and help to replace peace order in the region. But how about the people? I mean, do you in your diplomacy you mentioned that your primary strategic right now is through diplomacy, and you've also mentioned that it seems to be very successful now. Is between Ukrainian and Indonesian people to people, are we looking at has there been any successful or any increased relationship between our two countries?
I would say that first of all, we appreciate a lot the efforts of Indonesia in supporting Ukraine, and of course the visit of President Jokowi. That was the first Asian leader visiting Ukraine after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and that was the beginning of summer, like not a long time after the full-scale invasion has started, and the Kyiv suburbs were liberated.
The war was still on at that time, very heavily, and he visited.
Yes. I mean, even in Kyiv region, that was really dangerous. And of course, Indonesia supported the UNJ resolution on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That was really also very important.
Yeah.
When it comes to people-to-people contact, so now we're not talking about like very wide circles of society, because it would be hard to reach out to. But now we talk about some expert-to-expert talks and communication. Like again, journalist to journalist, maybe people of culture to people of culture, like artists.
Yeah, we mentioned businessmen.
Yes, entrepreneurs as well. So, I mean, I would start with that, and we have already one very good example, because one of the authors who visited and experts who visited Ukraine in December of the previous year, he wrote a book on Islam in Crimea.
Okay, interesting.
His name is Yanuar Dishukur, and this book was presented in the beginning of this week in one of the universities in Jakarta. So, and I believe that something like that at this point is really important. Like, we do not count that we can do some large-scale projects. It would be complicated, but at least now this talks to grab an understanding of each other's perspectives would be important. But also, what I found fascinating in a very perspective topic is when it comes to the decolonization, and it came also as a surprise for me. So there are some projects that were implemented here in Indonesia back in Soviet times, when Soviet Union was still existing, and people associate these objects with Russia. But the thing is that there were many Ukrainians who invested, like this stadium in Jakarta. We were just discussing the other day that this stadium was built by Soviet Union, and Indonesian people are thankful to Russia. But I mean, it's not only about Russia. There were many Ukrainians, engineers, construction, just people who did the construction, who were there. I mean, they contributed to this project. And I think, and we were discussing this as an idea for the nearest time, to make a project that would show Indonesian people the role of Ukrainians and Ukraine-Indonesia relations that were there. So we don't start from the scratch, basically. There is some history, but we have to look at this history with the anti-colonial perspective. And when we use this lens, we immediately see that it was not all about Russia. There was a huge role of Ukraine, I mean, at least in some projects. And I think that's a good starting point, you know, to look in the history. It's pretty recent history, and just to start from that point, you know, maybe to even to invite those people to speak that were engaged in the projects here, to, you know, to listen to their kind of memories. What do they remember? What was, how did Indonesia look at that point? And of course, it changed dramatically. Now it's
interesting,
fascinating. Jakarta is fascinating.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think your point is very interesting. I mean, we can imagine we had some great support in our effort back then, fighting wars against the Dutch colonialism. And yes, I probably believe that all the submarines and all the battleship that was made in most part was made in Ukraine, and probably shipped by captained by a Ukrainian as well. That's very interesting.
And that's also the work that we have to do, because on our side we need to figure out where the role of Ukraine was and to show it to you. That's our job. That has to be done. So we have to do this and to go back.
So I guess in the future, what we're looking for is a relationship in terms of probably a key community. Community businessman, as you mentioned, educator, and so forth. But what do you see as a diplomat in doing diplomacy in mediation? What do you see in the future? I mean, in terms of short term, middle term, long term, from now on.
So here I would say that I'm not the part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so it's more up to them.
Yeah.
But again, this strategy that I mentioned, I think that is very good that we have some strategy. It's very important because now we can move according with the strategy. And again, when it comes to business, of course, war brings its dramatic consequences. And just the other day I met with one of the entrepreneurs, that Indonesian one that used to work, they had some businesses in Ukraine, mostly related to agriculture, and mostly in eastern Ukraine. And now he had to forget about it as of now. And of course, I mean, that's the problem, because when you have things like that, you cannot, I mean, count that there will be like a huge progress in business interaction, because again, business is very pragmatic. It wants some clear situation, security, that's some basic things. And if you invest, you want to make sure that
there's a return on it.
Yeah, exactly. And now in the situation of Ukraine is pretty challenging. But still, I feel like in our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there's this clear vision, especially when it comes on the economic cooperation. And I hope it will move forward. And on our side, I think that we will continue with, small steps are important. And we will try in the nearest time just to hold some online meetings, even online, with experts from the Indonesian think tanks, just to establish these connections. And of course we hope, because this year Ukraine is going to hold several high-level summits of the Crimea platform at the governmental level, on the parliamentary level. So, and again, now in Indonesia you have this transitional period. You will have the inauguration of the new president, new parliament. So you understand it takes time. It will take several months. So therefore, we have to wait until it happens, and then hopefully in some formats we will be able to invite and to bring some of the Indonesian representatives to this high-level forums that are aimed basically at the same purpose, just to support the international order in the end.
Okay, lovely. Okay, hopefully our platform has helped also to deliver the message that you're sending, and hopefully this also helps several of our viewers and most Indonesian people to understand more about Ukraine and also the situation in the region. Thank you, Maria Toma, for coming in and having this wonderful chat. It's been fun. Hope if you come back in Jakarta again, you visit us again and we'll have another chat.
Okay, or we can talk in Kyiv or better in
Oh,
Crimea.
that's lovely. I have to bring my helmet probably.
Yes, we can give you
metal helmet.
No problem.
All right, thank you, Maria. Terima kasih banyak. Begitu para pemirsa Gata TV, barusan kita bicara dengan santai dan menarik sekali dengan Maria Toma. Beliau ada representatif diplomasi dari Ukraine untuk menyampaikan atau juga menjalin kerjasama atau pengertian lebih dalam lagi antara Ukraina dan Indonesia. Semoga objektif Ibu Maria datang di Indonesia bermanfaat bagi kedua negara. Oke, seperti itu aja para pemirsa Gata TV. Jangan lupa untuk like dan juga subscribe, dan juga nanti bisa bergabung kembali di acara Gatra Special Interview berikutnya. Terima kasih, sampai jumpa.